Maybe you saw something about this in the paper yesterday, but unless you were in court for the case of Floyd versus the city of New York this week, you likely didn't actually hear it. Here's the New York Police Department Deputy Inspector Christopher McCormick in the middle of a contentious conversation with the officer who recorded it, Pedro Serrano.
So what am I supposed to do? Is it stop every black and Hispanic? I told you that I have to be there. I must be there.
Again, you're telling me about you want to stop, you're telling me you're going to stop everybody, you want to stop all black and Hispanic.
I'm not going to do that. You want to do that. I don't want to do that.
This is about stopping the right people, the right place, the right location.
Okay.
Again, take Mott Haven where we had the most problems.
Right.
And most problems we had there was robberies and grand larcenies.
And who are those people robbing?
The problem was what? Male blacks, and I told you that roll call, and I have no problem telling you this. Male blacks 14 to 20, 21, and I said this at roll call.
Did you catch that? The male blacks and their ages? That clip played in the federal district court on Thursday would seem to settle the debate for many about whether the controversial NYPD's policy of stop, question, and frisk is focused more on race than on crime and suspicion. And here's what some had to say outside of the courtroom.
I heard the arguments today in the courtroom, and the New York argument seems to be to justify, not deny. Seems to rationalize, not deny.
There's a siege going on in communities of color where the police are told, even if they don't want to, and we have officers standing next to me who saying they don't want to do that because it's illegal, are told that they need numbers.
It's just the level of uncertainty, just not knowing, what was happening and being cuffed for the first time and everything boiled up into one, being in the back of a police car. I had never had that happen to me.
The legality of what most call stop and frisk is in question. And here with me are four people to help explain why the policy itself is so problematic. Joining me now are New York City Councilman Jumaane Williams, Vince Warren, Executive Director of the Center for Constitutional Rights, which is bringing this lawsuit against the city, documentary filmmaker Ross Tuttle, and Manhattan Community College student Nicholas Part, who says he was stopped and frisked by the NYPD at least 5 times. I want to start with you, Vince. What is this case? What's at the heart of it?
This is a case to end once and for all the massive invasion of rights for people in this city. The stop and frisk policy has been going on for a very, very long time. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to get the police to act constitutionally, to stop people for an articulated reason, for a particular reason, and not on the basis of race and not in such massive numbers.
So explain to me why it's a problem. I mean, there you have the sergeant saying, hey, look, if the people who commit crimes are young black men, I see some young black men, I'm trying to stop crime in this city, it is a reasonable police procedure for me to stop these young men.
There's nothing reasonable and there's nothing legal about it, unless you assume that every African-American person from 14 to 21 in the city is a suspect.
Just the guys.
Yeah, just the guys. That's true. 50% of that population. Yeah. No, but the problem here is that the police are not stopping anybody, or they're not stopping based on suspicion.
Yep.
That the police department constitutionally have to have some reason to be able to do this. And stop in targeting an entire neighborhood and then stopping folks because they're black and brown and using that as a proxy for criminal activity does not pass constitutional muster at all.
So Nicholas, talk to me about what that feels like, though, in a real sense, to be constantly targeted by the stop and frisk policy.
Well, to be constantly targeted is very disheartening, because you have individuals that's going, living their everyday lives, and they are stopped. It is no reason why, the community should, feel that hostility from law enforcement, someone who works for the city. It's absurd, and, I shouldn't have to walk in my neighborhood and worry what a cop is thinking, or wonder, just because I'm walking outside at night that I'm more likely to be stopped. That shouldn't exist.
This idea, Councilman, is part of, I feel like it's part of the difference of the experience of being a black American, is that sense that it's never officer friendly, that when you see the police car, you get a tightening of your stomach, you get a sense of anxiety, not a sense of protect and serve.
And apparently it doesn't stop. I mean, I was arrested on Labor Day at Eastern Parkway trying to get into an event with Kirsten John Ford, who worked for a citywide official. they either didn't believe we said who we were or just didn't care. And it's 2013, and it's also frustrating to me that it seems like things I've seen in the 1960s. Jesse Jackson is on the courtroom. We're trying to tell people why it's wrong to do things to certain segments of the community. It's amazing that we even have to have this discussion. For some reason, when it comes to law enforcement and stopping crime, the answer has always been stop as many black and Latino young men as you can, lock up as many as you can. That has never been a solution, has never worked, and never will. And we know what the solutions are, and for some reason we keep going back to, unfortunately, what's generally been acceptable. Everyone in these communities are criminals, even though the NYPD's own statistics show that stop, question, and frisk has no correlation between guns found, between shootings, and between murders. Yep. So they're wedded to a policy that's unfortunately driving a wedge into our communities. So when instances like what happened a couple of weeks ago in my district with Kamani Gray, that fury comes up. And it's what happened in terms of the violence and unrest cannot be condoned, but you also cannot condone those who are ignoring the anger for so long.
We just showed an image of Kamani Gray, so some of us have been following it very closely, others haven't. So for folks who don't know, tell us a little bit about that story.
Kamani Gray is a 16-year-old. On March 9th, he was shot and killed by officers who said that he had a gun. And they made a lot of statements without a full investigation, which I think was unfortunate. They should stop doing that. But I do know this is not about the details of one particular shooting. Not too long ago, Chantel Davis was shot and killed not too far from there. She was unarmed. Ramarley Graham, they ran in his house, shot and killed him in his bathroom. Stop, question, and frisk. Mayor Bloomberg and Commissioner Kelly have stopped 5 million people in the past over a little decade, and it's shown no correlation, as I said. As a matter of fact, this past year, shootings were down, murders were down, and stops were down. So there's no correlation whatsoever with this policy.
You know, it's interesting. You bring up the point of optics, and yes, seeing Reverend Jackson standing there on the courthouse steps talking about issues of police misconduct in black communities does feel like, oh, excuse me, what decade are we in? How do we begin to move past what seems to be now a decades-long problem of this relationship between police and communities of color?
Well, I mean, you talk about optics, and I think, it's perception. And, they say that this is an effective crime-fighting tool. Yet when you look at how you're alienating an entire community, and then you have people, when they react, when there's something that, there's maybe a gray area, when a shooting does occur. But people aren't going to accept that. They're not going to wait for the verdict to come out because of this experience. And this is continuing over and over again. And we hear these stories because of the aggressive nature of a lot of these stops and because of the unnecessary nature of a lot of these stops. I mean, just based on, the research that I've done and the officers that I've spoken to, and that they're told to go out there and do these stops based on nothing more than getting quotas, meeting numbers, meeting these objectives, and if they don't, they're under threat. They're under threat in several ways.
And I just want to, just before we go to the break on this, I want to reemphasize that point that a lot of times officers have a sense of discomfort with it, but that this policy is occurring at a very high level, which is part of what we heard in that audio tape.
Absolutely. I mean, the officers I've spoken to, and I've spoken to numerous officers, and they do articulate that a high level of discomfort with this. A lot of them are afraid to come forward to do anything about it. When they do, they get retaliated against. I mean, you hear the two officers who were on the stand, the brave officers who were on the stand in the trial this week. I mean, they're fearful, and they have been retaliated against. Other officers I've spoken to speak to me in the shadows, are afraid to come forward, but express extreme discomfort, and their colleagues do as well. They don't know what to do about it. They come to me, which is crazy because there's nothing internal that they can do to solve the problem. So they're coming to me and they say, I have nowhere else to go. I was like, God, this is really this is an upsetting situation.
This is bad. We're going to stay on exactly this topic because this is a case in New York, but this is not an exclusively New York problem when we come back.